Thank you for joining me. We are going to be using a MYP task, a summative task at that, using all of these 4 criteria, and the purpose is to give students accurate and consistent feedback without sending you up the wall. So we are going to be putting together a Google form similar to this, which in turn will generate information stored on Google Sheets, the new version of Excel. We'll be using this add-on called Autocrat, which will convert lines and lines and lines of data using a template to create individual feedback comments for students at the end of their assessment task. Okay, so good luck and enjoy. This whole tutorial is based around our current grade 6 task, MYP1 Impacts of Exploration. The current unit is all about the interaction between European explorers discovering indigenous lands and people for the first time. So it's quite a large task. It's the largest investigation they'll do over the course of grade 6. The global context we're looking at is fairness and development, so we're looking at who wins and who loses and possibly how this has impacted the development of a group of people from either side of the coin. The key concept of the unit and therefore the task is global interaction. Exploration, I feel, illustrates this beautifully, where we have largely European explorers interacting with indigenous people, and we get to see the consequences therein. The statement of inquiry for the unit is the lives of indigenous people were positively affected by maritime exploration. The SOI is deliberately contentious. I think this gives a good opportunity for the students to express a point of view. They can also consider the counter argument, and again does help develop building up analysis and forming conclusions. We'll be addressing most of the criteria for individuals and societies in this task, with the exception of strand 3 from thinking critically. This was addressed by a smaller task earlier in the year. Other than that, we will be focusing on communication skills. The students will be able to communicate their understanding non-verbally through the final product, which we'll get to in the fullness of time, and also the verbal side of it, which will be in the form of a seesaw reflection later on at the conclusion of the task. Now, the focus of this section will be on grasps. This is one way to develop a more authentic approach to assessment for the students. So, as acronyms go, each letter means something. So, G for goal. They have 2 key goals here, which is to research the events and consequences of first contact with indigenous people. The second goal is to produce an infographic which shows the first contact and 2 consequences of the interaction between indigenous people and explorers. So R for role. First one is a researcher, where they will be provided sources based on a selection of question options, and they will have to complete some research tables to build their understanding. The second role is a ship's artist, who is there to record these key events. The images they will be sourcing are most likely to be paintings or sketches or wood cuttings or something of that nature, and they will also be asked to describe and explain these events in the context of global interaction. The audience in this particular task is going to be their grade level and up. We're going to be looking to avoid any assumed knowledge, and we want the students to be encouraged to include all terminology. The audience aspect of grasps is vital to building the authentic context of your particular task. For instance, for a business studies task, you may well be pitching an idea to a senior management. You may well be looking at your customer base to find out whether your product will work well, or environmental impact assessments, where you could be looking at the impact of an introduced species to a particular region. This could be aimed towards the local government, it could be aimed towards environmental scientists, it could be aimed at the local community. So how the task is developed will be in line with these outcomes. The situation. This is obviously a position that the particular student should be writing from, so the task requires the students to think about the perspectives of both sides, the explorers and the indigenous people, at first contact and 2 chosen impacts from that point onwards. It's very important that the images reflect that. The final product is the infographic, which we have created as a template. The students are going to be heavily guided through this process through a series of activities. They're not just going to be asked to get on with it, and therefore a infographic template is being provided. They just need to complete the text, format it, and maybe change the background color, and of course include their own images and their text. The final letter of the GRASP system is standards for success. What we have trialed this time around is taken the top band strand for each of the 4 criteria and adapt them to a checklist. Towards the end of the task, the students will be able to go through and make sure that what they have done is as good as possible. For instance, that the seesaw reflection responds to both of the questions on processing information from sources with examples. How we're going to get the students to do this is through a series of 10 activities, some of them which will take a matter of seconds, which is just setting up a folder and creating a research research document. Some of the activities are more straightforward, such as picking their research question. They've got 4 to choose from there. Some of them actually involve a Google form. They are also provided source materials. They are provided with research templates and other Google Forms and other activities to actually complete the task. What we'll be focusing on and what we'll be using in this for the Autocrat purposes are the task-specific clarification. Over here we have got the published criteria from MYP Year 1. What we do here is we have adapted these to make them a little bit more student friendly, a little bit more in plain English, and also adapted to the specifics of the task. For instance, the explanations of how the images are linked to global interaction are excellent. This is derived from this strand over here, which demonstrates excellent knowledge and understanding of content and concepts through detailed descriptions, explanations and examples. So again, that's been adapted to, they frequently use evidence from the descriptions, i.e. the examples, to accurately illustrate how Indigenous people were impacted by exploration. So very straightforward to do. I'd always recommend starting with the top band and then scaling it back to the lower bands, also making sure that you are using the published criteria as effectively as possible. So again, there are task-specific clarifications for all 4 of the criteria. Okay, thank you. What I want to do is to create a Google form, and from that Autocrat will function. So what you need to do is go to New and go to More and click on Google Forms. And I'm going to name this form just up in the top corner here, G6 Exploration. Feedback, and that will automatically name that there. I'll go to responses. Okay, this is where all the information from your various forms will find itself, but it's all stored on a spreadsheet which you have to create yourself. And you don't have to do anything other than click create, and that will automatically be created in the location where you opened up this first Google form. So there's the Google form and there is the sheet. Right, so you need to click on the sheet, double click on that. So Google Sheets is just the Google version of Excel, in case you're curious. So you go to add-ons up on this top menu here, get add-ons, and you want Autocrat. So click on the search gap thing there, and it's free magically. And we want to do all of these things, say allow, sell our soul to Google, and give it a few seconds, and Autocrat is there. I don't care what they have to say there, and that's just going to open up for the first time. So I'll close that because we don't care about that at the moment. So if I go back to the original drive space, we're up to there. Okay, easy stuff. Talk you through how to generate a series of questions which will create a comment specific to one criteria in the MYP. We're going to be using the published criteria from MYP1, which is our grade 6, but I've adapted those into task-specific criteria to make the language a little bit more straightforward. So in order to do this, we'll go to New, we're going to create a brand new form for this. I will actually do one for all of the 4 criteria later on, but I'm not going to flick that upon you because I typed like a gorilla. Criterion A. Click on that, automatically sorts it out. The first question is going to be their name. Okay, so this is really useful for the file naming system. It's a reference for you on the actual document itself. So I'm going to magically call that student name. Lovely. And short answer is going to be grand because we just want to type in what their name is. I'm going to make it required. It has to be done. I'm going to add a description on here for other teachers. So please put name first, exclamation mark. Okay, that's really important for formatting and finding the file later on. The next question is another practical one, which is going to be their mentor group. This is really useful for creating file names as well, and it doesn't really need an explanation. It either is or it isn't, so I'm using multiple choice. I'm going to make that mandatory, has to happen. In fact, all of these things have to happen. Right, the next question is actually going to be about the feedback. So we are going to be using this task sheet here. This is the table for criteria. So we've got the published MYP criteria on this side, the level 1 to 2 up to 7 to 8. We've got the task-specific criteria in plain language, which we're going to use to actually feed back to the kids. So the first thing we're going to look at is this strand here. So I've actually adapted the 2 strands of the published criteria, 1 and 2, into 3. So now I'm going to Command C that, and go over to my question. I'm actually going to use a description just for a second. So that's the kind of information I want to get over to the students about how well they've used terminology or not, or how specific or accurate they've been. The question I'm going to call is going to be crit a terminology. It's good to be quite specific with what the information is going to be used for and how it's going to be directed later on. You have to assign these to specific parts of the template, so if it's clearer to you, it just speeds things up. So the top band, no generalizations are used. The third band, some generalizations. The second band here, generalizations or inappropriate terminology are used. And the first band, we've got inappropriate terminology. So now I rather sneakily created a form already just to speed things along. So I'm taking this here, this is the top strand, and what I'm doing, I've actually adapted it, and I'll just copy this over. So your descriptions field, generalizations or inappropriate terminology for the time period. Makes no sense. So what I need to do is fill in some options for myself. If we read this through, your image descriptions, field gap there, have no generalizations or inappropriate terminology for the time period. Your image descriptions have some generalizations, blah de blah. Your image descriptions have generalizations or inappropriate terminology. Your image descriptions have frequent generalizations or inappropriate terminology for the time period. Do you see how it's working? Now, it's important in this image description here. This will save you a load of time later on. So once you've created the name of your field, if you actually insert it into the sentence structure it's going to form later on, it makes it easier to sort out your grammar. You can see whether it makes sense, and if you can get this done now, it will save you proofreading a lot more later on when you copy the comments over to your preferred assessment system. Let's move on to the next one. So you click on here for an add a question, and I'm going to move back over to my task, which is all about descriptions. So the top band here is the descriptions of the images are finely detailed, picking out lots of features of the people and the place. Okay, and then we scale it back from there through the band. So I'm going to take that over. So in an ideal world, all of the students could be described in such a way. I'm going to put this in the description, just for the time being. I'm going to name this particular field crit a underscore descriptions. Chevron. Okay, so again, to save you the pain of watching me do this, I've actually created this sentence already. I'm just going to copy it over here. Come on. So as it was, the top strand was the descriptions, or your descriptions of the images are finely detailed, picking out lots of features of the people and the place. I'm going to swiftly replace that with, well, let's change that around. In fact, if you just click on things once in Google Forms, and then you can copy it. You don't have to double click. If you want to go within a sentence, you've got to be a little bit more precise. So the descriptions of the images, crit A descriptions, the people and the places shown. Makes no sense. Let's weave some magic now. Let's do the lowest band first. B. The descriptions of the images are lacking in detail of the people and the places shown. Let's just do another question here. So the next strand we're looking at is, well, I've done it into two halves. The explanations of how the images are linked to global interaction, this is our key concept for the unit, are excellent. Great. Right, so I'm going to take that as a top strand description. So I'm just going to plonk this into the description field. Okay. So this is going to be in two halves, this statement. So I've just put a number in there to make it easier. So I've got to change the explanations of how the images are linked to global interaction are excellent. That needs to be scaled back but this is a very easy one to do, this type of one. So I'm just going to copy the one I did earlier. Your explanations of how the images are linked to global interactions were field, right. So, your explanations of how the images are linked to global interaction were strong, or satisfactory, or basic. That's how that sentence should read later on. Okay, so let's go to the next criteria, or the criteria strand. So the second half of this, the explanations of how the images are linked to global interaction are excellent. They frequently use evidence from the descriptions to accurately illustrate how Indigenous people were impacted by exploration. I'm just going to take this, I might delete a comma or two as well. And because it's the second half of that rather long sentence, I'm going to call it crit a expl underscore 2. I'm going to want to turn this into, well, to go back to the criteria, the lowest band here is the explanations of how the images are linked to global interaction are basic. Little or no evidence is used to illustrate how Indigenous people were impacted by exploration. So we've got to scale this back across 4 bands. I changed the framing sentence, the structure, to this. So we've gone from they frequently use evidence from the descriptions to accurately illustrate how Indigenous people were impacted by exploration. Replace it with where you used, okay, we need a space in there, where you used option to illustrate how Indigenous people were impacted by exploration. So let's see how this reads. Where you used little or no evidence to illustrate how Indigenous people were impacted by exploration. Let's go to the third band, where you used evidence appropriately from the descriptions to illustrate how Indigenous people were impacted by the exploration. So hopefully you got the gist of this by now. What's really important is that we do give something which actually shows we are human beings. The previous multiple choice options there, it's quite formulaic. It is specific to the criteria, which is obviously what we need to do, even though the language has been adjusted to make it a bit more accessible. What I found has worked quite well is adding a target, and I've set this up as a paragraph text, which gives us, well, it's easier to read and to write into when you're actually doing the form, and it gives you more scope to put a lot more specific detail linked to the student's strengths or weaknesses. So for this target, this is just going to stand alone on the template, but I've given some prompts here, so it helps me frame my views later on. So I'm asking myself and the other teachers, how could the student include more subject terminology, pick out more detail, use evidence in their explanation. So it does refer to the earlier criteria multiple choice options, and it also means that I can use specific examples from their work. Finally, we've got criterion A score. Okay, so this is the number 1 through to 8. So once you've completed all of these options here, and you know, if the kids are getting mostly top bands at the bottom here as well, then you can use your professional judgment to work out the score they're getting. Preview, and this is what it's going to look like in resplendent burgundy or salmon, whatever it is, a burgundy salmon. I'll just show you what a full feedback form looks like. This is 4 criteria, so it's pretty long, but this involves all of the 4 criteria that the task is addressing. It gets a little bit more compact when you show the live version to yourself later on. Anyway, we need that up because what we need to do is create a template to run the Autocrat system. What we're doing, the folder where all this information is kept is constructed there, so we just need a Google Doc. I'll call it GSIP Explore template, and this is where the final paragraph for each student will be based upon. So it's very easy to do. You've got all the stuff you need in your form. First of all, student name, and just have that at the top of the page. If you're feeling fancy, maybe you want the mental group next to it. When I say it, I mean the child. Same difference. Right, next is what I like to do, because it makes it easier to copy it over to the assessment platform, is put the criteria scores, the grades, at the top of the page. So, and then just give this a store. Next we need to go through in a bit more of a sensible order. Now, this is where we start to save time from earlier. So, all you've got to do is click on the description for the particular question and paste it into the document. You need to think about double spacing and other formatting because it will do whatever you set it up for. Okay, so that is our template. So what will happen every time you complete a form, which is what you'll see, the burgundy salmon effect. It's quite long, it is quite a big task. There are a lot of aspects to it, but I find this a lot more well, mentally calming than actually having to write a statement over and over again, often in the same style. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that there.
Right, so we've completed the form, we have completed the template. Hopefully now this should all work. So the first thing I would recommend doing is making a folder, a destination folder for all of your comments. Click G6 exploration comments, point 1. Okay, so that we now have a specific point where all the information will go. So what I need to do is actually complete a form. I'm going to do this very quickly. So if you want to, this is obviously the template which you don't mess around with unless you want to change it. This is the preview. Okay, so I'm just going to put in 60, and I'm just going to rapidly go through these. Okay, so I usually go into a lot more depth in the comments, but I want to speed things along. Okay, so you can just click that over and over again until you have all of your students covered in your class, and that's when you start to see the return on actually creating the template. Again, if you're sharing this across a grade level with other teachers, you collectively save a huge amount of time. So if we go to our feedback sheets, we should have Michael Robinson's input. So we need to now turn this into a comment, and we go to add-ons, Autocrat and open. You should already load this up. Okay, so we're going to go new job, and I'm going to call it feedback comments G6. Click next. We need the template, which we get by clicking from the drive. It should be relatively recent. Let's have a look. There we go, explore templates. Select and give it a second, and that'll pop in. So Autocrat's now looking at that template and all the tags that we've created. So we don't have to click on anything now, just go to next. Okay, this is a bit fiddly, but we have to match all of these tags that are on the template to the information that are in the columns. So I will just go through these very, very swiftly. Okay, that's all those done. It's always worth going back through them to make sure they're all matching. Okay, so the next thing we need to do is to create a file name. You click on this side arrow here, and I would recommend doing the mentor group first if you are working with numerous classes. That's getting ahead of itself. And then obviously the student name, and there you go. So hopefully for each student a personalised file will be created, and it'll be easy to get. You want to be keeping it as Google Docs, keeping it as multiple output mode. Just click on next. We just need to choose the folder it's going to be in. So it's going to let me do this. So this is the one. Right, let's select that. And next. We don't need that. We don't need that. We're not sharing it. We do want it to run on a form trigger, so every time you complete a form, a new statement will be created, and we're going to save it. Okay, so this is completed. So this is just what you see on Autocrat. So we just want to run the job to make sure it's working. So from this point onwards, every time a form is completed, the comments should be generated. So if we click on the exploration comments, there we have Michael Robinson's being created, and here we go, all complete. So you can see my very sparse target comments here at the bottom. I would honestly usually go into a bit more depth, but there you have it. That's again one of the more detailed versions of this merge. You can, in 10 seconds doing some clicking, you've generated all of these comments. You can do this as short or as long as you wish. It's entirely up to you. So thank you very much for sticking with it this far.